Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome one of our guests, Jefferson Spatchcock. I'm sure you guys have all run into him at some stage online. Welcome to our little corner of the internet. I've been following you. Yeah, I've been a very keen follower of everybody that's in this atheist sphere, and the thing happened. Our channel happened like this, and we were told here in South Africa that we were getting all these disgruntled comments out. Like all atheists are these old academics, who sit in libraries the whole day and and brood and plot to take over the world and to indoctrinate your children on the playground. And so we just decided, let's get a couple of atheists together and just have authentic, real conversations with people and find out what the real reason is why they decided to leave religion. And like I said earlier, I've been a very keen follower of everybody who's talking in this space. I ran across your channel, and I said to myself, hey, let's pull this guy and let's find out what's cooking there.
Thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about your background, Jefferson. Were you born in a religious household? Did you grow up in religion? What was that like for you?
Yeah, my parents, my first memories were of a church that they attended that was a non-denominational kind of Pentecostal, maybe more of like an outgrowth of like the 60s or 70s, like Jesus freaks, if you're familiar with those. They established their own church. They didn't even have a pastor because that was too square. They had 12 elders, so they were like the early church in the book of Acts. There was lots of praying in tongues and hooping and hollering, and there was a live band and stuff like that. So it attracted a lot of various types of people. And those are some of my earliest memories. And then that church, like a lot of churches like that, kind of imploded for a lot of different reasons. Financial was one. They established a school where they were going to educate all their own kids. And then there was talk of building a commune, like a collective living and working center. Like it was getting weird. But the school bankrupted them. I think that's how.
I hope they didn't plan on serving Kool-Aid or anything.
I mean, we actually did like communion, and it was always grape juice and French bread, which as a kid was my favorite part of going to church. But yeah, when I was old enough to understand the Jim Jones thing, I was like, man, I hope that grape juice was all natural. Like, considered Kool-Aid. But after that group, they kind of the official business of that church kind of fell apart. They kept doing like home ministries and stuff for years. I remember them meeting at different houses and stuff like that, but we kind of drifted for a while. And then we attended a few other churches and stuff in between while that church would have issues and stuff like that. And then I ended up, the last church that I regularly attended was a very conservative Wesleyan denomination called the Church of the Nazarene. And right. I attended there from probably the age of 10 or 11 until about 15 or 16. And I was really into it. And then that church had a little bit of a falling out between its members, and it involved my family and issues with board members not towing the line, the official rules of the denomination of the Wesleyan or the Nazarenes. So I kind of fell away from it after that. And then I just kind of quit attending. And then I went to college. And I stayed a believer. I just kind of, after that, having memories of these churches always kind of falling apart. And I was, me or my family were kind of a common denominator. I just figured maybe that's a sign I'm not supposed to go. And it wasn't until I was about 28, 29 that I really kind of started calling it into question. So, yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, what was that process of starting to call things into question like for you? Can you describe that journey of, taking a critical look at your religion, and what was was it completely an inside job? Were there any external factors or anything that played into this, into starting this journey off?
Yeah, probably. I mean, probably travel. I did some study abroad when I was in school. I spent a decent amount of time in Japan, and
Mm.
Japanese have kind of a laid back and pragmatic view of like religion in general, where you can go to a Shinto shrine and engage in a ritual there. You can go to a Buddhist one. You can do Christmas, but Christmas over there is more like a Valentine's Day kind of thing. You know, you could attend a Christian church. It's very kind of potluck for them. And the between that and then, like, I was dating a girl from there for a while here in the States, and one day we had never really discussed religion. And I asked her, you know, she asked me if I believed in God, if I was a Christian, how that worked. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I was raised that way. I still believe in Jesus and salvation and all that. And I said, how about you? And she's like, I don't believe in God from the jump. And when I asked her why, she basically gave me the problem of suffering.
Right,
And,
right.
and it was kind of the first time I'd heard it from a person in real life. I as a
Right.
Christian, I'd heard of it, but I'd never engaged in any apologetics. I'd never got into that stuff. And when she told me about that, I was like, well, I think maybe there's different ways around that. It just, as a Christian, even a kind of a lapsed one, it just seemed like especially pessimistic. And I was like, well, you know, I was already like capable of dancing but around the issue. And she's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. Why would God let a baby deer burn to death in a forest if he's supposed to, you know, and he loves me, he's going to take care of me? Like, you know, and I think she mentioned something about a relative dying in horrible pain from a disease, you know, and she's like, we offered offerings and all this other kind of stuff. It doesn't do anything, you know. And I said, well, what about Japanese tradition? She's like, well, if it's Shinto, you offer stuff to your relatives, but your relatives can't. There's no promises that your relatives can save you. Your dead relatives can save your living ones. We don't live under that kind of fantasy. And I was like, touche, you know. And so I thought she made some pretty good points. I mean, she was making I think that's probably a really common one, especially amongst Japanese people, but a lot of people that are skeptical of religions that offer those kinds of, you know, super hopeful claims. And then it wasn't until later on that I started getting into questioning other ideological views that I held, that I then was like, wait a minute. I revisited the religion thing and then started digging into that. And so lots and lots of reading finally finished it off.
You know, without fail, when you introduce a critical mind to another type of religion, and they compare the two, you know, it's inevitable. You cannot know how the sausages are made without losing your taste for them completely.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that works.
Especially when they just keep dropping the ingredients on the floor and saying there's no problem.
So, you know, was there any specific, you know, person or organization that were influential in, you know, in lighting this candle for you? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess I'd have to credit her specifically. I mean, we stopped seeing each other years ago, but yeah, because of that conversation, that was kind of influential in just getting the wheels spinning. It didn't lead to anything directly, but then I would revisit that conversation in my head, and then I started thinking, like, wait a minute, maybe I'm off base. So it's going to sound really, this is going to sound really cliched, but the most influential thing for me was actually, it was Christopher Hitchens, but it was not his God is Not Great book. It was actually, he did a book called The Atheist Reader. And I got that one day. I used to work a job that required long hours and I didn't really have to do much. And it was overnight. So I started reading a lot about lots of different things, politics and religion being the two big ones. And I got that book because I was kind of interested. I'd heard him speak on stuff like that. In fact, I even saw him at my college campus. So I was kind of a fan of his.
wow.
And back then I was politically conservative and he kind of was too. He was very anti-Clinton and I kind of was in my younger years. So I thought, you know, hey, I kind of respect this guy's opinion. When he put that book together, it had all sorts of different essays and things in it. And I read those, and that wasn't just his stuff. You know, he'd have like an intro to it, but then you're reading these different things. And some of them went back to, like, I think that one of them was from like the Rubaiyat, you know, and these different like Islamic poems and things. And that really did it. Because that was like a comparative literary approach to, like, okay, this person says this, this person says this, and you're getting sort of like artwork and essays created by people who have internalized their own expression of issues with religion, mostly Christianity. Some of them were Islam, And that
Right.
kind of sealed the deal. And by the time I got to the end of that book and kind of wrestled with some of the ideas, it was actually, I think the Rubaiyat, that particular poem, that was it. I read that one and I was like, oh, I don't. And then I had like an aha moment. So it was that yeah.
Yeah.
So it was Hitchens, but by way of like his bibliography. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, you cannot be introduced to the works of Christopher Hitchens without being moved by it in some way. You know, that
Yeah.
the man had a very, very, besides his unique command of the English language, he had a very, very clear way of I don't know if it's like dissecting bullshit, but you know, he
Yeah.
has a very clear way of just looking through. I don't know how to word it, but you know, people when people are trying to present you with an idea, they always veil it in so many layers of different things, you know. And he had a very unique way of just dissecting right through to it, and as he's peeling each layer, making it very, very crystal clear, you know, what's wrong with the idea. But
Yeah.
yeah, I as well, you know, like even nowadays, you know, whenever I encounter, you know, YouTube will always every now and then it will suggest an old Hitchens video to you, you know, and it's I watch them with very, very fond memories of the first time I encountered him as well. It was really like a coming home type of moment. Just, you know, to find someone who has the courage and the chutzpah to actually just voice all of those doubts in
Yeah.
you know, that you've always had in such a clear and erudite way. Very, very influential part in my journey as well. So let's talk a little bit about activism, Jefferson. You know, we as the Atheist Republic, you know, we try to you know, encourage our members as well. You know, we don't, you know, when people hear the word activism, they're thinking of someone chained to a bulldozer outside a forest, you know, or right. You know, it creates this immediate picture in your mind, you know. But activism can be as straightforward and as simple as just being that voice of opposition, that one person that's yelling, "The emperor has no clothes on," you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, in your personal life or your online presence, you know, how do you feel about activism, and how do you take that on?
Yeah. I mean, based on your definition of it, I guess I'm kind of doing that in a way, but it's more it's more based on just like kind of looking at the way people are presenting an idea and then criticizing the communication of it. As far as being any activism that I would be involved in, and sort of like the typical, I mean, I'm a donator to different causes and that kind of thing, but I've never really been involved in, other than some political things, never really been involved in it, other than to the atheism thing kind of came as a result of conversations that I had with somebody at work.
Right.
I got I got introduced to the presuppositional apologetic in real life. Somebody used it on me in a conversation.
Oh
And
my.
that was rattling around in my brain. That was an itch that would not stop, and I insisted that I would scratch it, and I found it when I dug it up and got the definition of it. I got into that conversation. It took me about a week of searching the internet, looking at videos, watching conversations. Next time I got into a conversation like that, this individual did it again. And I said, "Oh, so you're going to use a presuppositional apologetic on me?" And his face went a little slack. You know, I'm not going to say his jaw dropped. That's too dramatic. But he did just kind of like, "Oh, okay. So you know that trick then. You like, yeah, I know you're palming a card, you know." And that
I'm sorry, I have to just pipe in here. You know, like the presuppositional apologetic is less than it's less like an itch that you want to scratch and more like a rash that you cannot get rid of.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like, yeah. It's like, there must be a cure for this. I won't stop until I find it. But that was it. And the way that was presented, there was something to me that was so personally offensive about the
Yeah.
presuppositional apologetic and the way it was when I saw other examples of it being used. And the person that used it in real life for me did not go the most obnoxious way that the examples that I saw online, and this was way back, almost 10 years ago. They were much more obnoxious, and I was like, okay, that right there, that dynamic is something worth speaking out about. And that was sort of what that was what drew me to it, was basically like, so I guess I was drawn to the idea of being an activist for better critical thinking and clear communication on those issues rather than resorting to rhetorical tricks and nonsense.
Right. Yeah. It's the funny thing about I also find presuppositional apologetics extremely distasteful. Firstly, because of they absolutely abscond that commission that was given to them in 1 Peter 3:15, where it says, always be prepared to give a reason for the faith that's within you. So firstly, I think it's completely it's shifting the burden of proof, first of all, which is which is the most egregious sin in my humble opinion. And secondly, it then creates a circular loop of an unfalsifiable claim. It's just crazy. And the way the thing that really grinds me the wrong way is just the level of confidence that it inspires in people who actually find this a believable or useful apologetic to use. It's like that. It's like a child in a playground that refuses to play with the other children and just wants to stand on top of the slide, crowing that this is the best playground in the world.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that works.
Yeah, all the other kids have the newest Nerf squirt gun or something, and he just grabs the hose. He's limited in motion, but he swears it's a bazooka. For me, the precept thing was sort of, I mean, that was the thing that got me into it, because I realized at that point that I hadn't seen Christians argue. I'd seen Christians debate amongst themselves, like in my dad's group when I was a kid. So I remember those conversations. And frankly, looking back on them, it was like watching fans of like Lord of the Rings talk about what they thought of like Tom Bombadil or something, But seeing that, I mean, you brought up a good point. The 1 Peter thing, they immediately went with this idea, like theologically, it didn't hold up, where like in that book, it does not say, be prepared to tell the non-believer to give a reason why they don't automatically by default believe you. Like, that's not what it says. You need to provide a reason. And even if the non-believer thinks it's a bad reason, it's like, at least you had a reason. The idea that they took it to the point where, like, you know what, I don't have to give any reasons. I got God. You don't. Defend yourself to me. And it's like, last time I checked, this is not the Inquisition. You are not in a position of power right now. I mean, I think they're working on it in the United States, but
Yeah, and there are some of them who will not be named that especially like to use this kind of apologetic as a bludgeon. They want to use it to just to silence dissent.
Yeah.
Because nothing will instill the greater fear in a person that gravitates towards this type of apologetic than to have extreme close-up scrutiny of their belief system, because that's the one thing that they know, that they are standing there holding an empty box. It's standing there holding an empty box and then just pretending that it's the biggest, bestest, most amazingest gift that they've got in the box.
I think the insecurity is, even if they feel they have something, it's in the rhetoric today, it's not enough that they feel it. It's not enough that they believe it. It's not, faith isn't enough. When they get into this stuff, they want to have all the arguments too. They want to have all the syllogisms, all the formulas, all the theories, all support and point their way. And it's like, it doesn't need to be that way. And nothing works that way for any dogma. Like, there's a difference between dogma and facts. And the fact that they're not comfortable with that tells me, like, that to me is evidence right there of, again, the lack of clear communication and the lack of critical thinking that's kind of getting transmitted, I think, from pulpits to pews. because the lay people are the ones that tend to kind of believe this, and they get this stuff from, I think in some cases from pastors and preachers that don't know any better themselves, or they're getting them from pastors who went to seminaries and do know better, but don't think it's worth their time to try to like wrestle with a congregation. Like, hey, let's talk about some of the Bible's, the Old Testament's endorsements of slavery, for example. They're not going to discuss that unless you go to a Unitarian Universalist church where you can go into one of those and have a Zen, you know, and start chanting Zen koans. They're cool with it.
Yeah, the Universalists. I've heard this on previous occasion. That the Universalists are Christianity light, or,
Yeah.
or something along that line. You know, they take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
Very crazy. So I can immediately tell what you're passionate about. You know, you're passionate about critical thinking.
Yeah.
You know, like anything else that fuels you besides, you know, like, I don't know, for me personally, it was when I discovered that there was something wrong with this picture. You know, like I wanted to show other people as well, and say to them like, hey, just, you know, be careful, there's a snake in the grass over there, you know, tread carefully. It's a lot of, you know, you find that with a lot of atheists is that they want to encourage people to think critically about things, to be more aware of cons and deceptions within the world. And personally, you know, some people say, you know, all atheism does is it strips you of your trust. You don't trust people anymore. And I said, well, you know, maybe there's good reason not to trust people who come peddling these bad ideas. But yeah, I'm very interested to hear what.
I was going to say my response to that would be like, if you believe that you can't be unequally yoked with other people, if you believe that there are certain people that you need to just scrape off away from your life, I would say that the trust issue is on your particular religion side too.
Yeah. People always say to us, you know, like, what harm does religion do to you? You know, like, how does it impact your life? You know, what are some of the ways that you now, upon reflection, realize that religion has had a negative impact on your life?
It probably the biggest was, I'm not going to try to get too personal about this, but it was sexually growing up. No one really needs to know, but I you know, I'm a cisgender, straight, you know, white American guy. So I didn't really wrestle with any of those issues, but you do wrestle with, you know, depending on the kind of denomination, Christian denomination you end up in, you do wrestle with the distinction between, you know, the thought sins, and then the deeds. You know, is it, you know, it's pretty obvious if you're a teenager and all you can think about is sex that it would be bad to have premarital sex. It's obviously bad to fornicate, but is it bad to constantly be thinking about it? Right? Is that nature or is that the devil? You know, and that kind of stuff bouncing around in your head as a young person, trying to wrestle with those feelings and those physical changes. That was probably the most. If I could say I experienced any religious trauma, that would be the closest, I think. And it was not that traumatic. I was able to grow out of it, but it stuck with me for a long time. It informed who I dated, how we dated, how we engaged in those relationships, our attitudes about, you know, what is healthy sexually and what isn't, you know, and a lot of it was just kind of old fashioned superstition, frankly. And then the other stuff was because my last church was in a really conservative, socially conservative church. I became very politically conservative, I think, as a result of that. And that affected me as I went into college, and it affected the way I spoke with people. It affected the way I approached facts. I would tend to argue people from defending the position of the conservative Republican kind of thing, you know, instead of trying to like compare and contrast both issues. So, those two things, dogmatism really did a number on me in terms of like, I was able to internalize Christian dogmatism to a point where I could weaponize it politically pretty easily. But at the same time, it took me a long time to realize that I had internalized some of that in things like interpersonal relationships and romantic relationships and what have you, that I didn't realize were affecting me until years later when I started to kind of let that stuff go. It just felt like a bunch of weight had dropped off. So yeah,
Exactly. You know,
cool.
it's amazing how those you know, and how insidious those control structures are that religion places upon, starting at a very young age. You know, there's these control structures that religion has built into itself just in order to get people to toe the line, I guess.
Yeah.
And those, you know, like you say, those excuse me, those control structures take a long time to you take, and it takes serious work to deprogram yourself of those structures that have been placed on you. They try to regulate your sexuality, the way that you interact with other people, and you know, people who are in the business on imprinting fear on the minds of young people are the most wicked in my opinion, you know. And for me personally, that, you know, I was so scared of burning in hell. I really was. You know, it was the stick. You didn't even have to put a carrot in front of me, you know. I was just petrified. It's crazy how that.
Yeah, and that goes for me. That kind of goes back to the sexuality part too. Though, as a kid, when it finally kicked in, like, oh wait, your thoughts can lead to hell too. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna burn forever, you know. And yeah,
I mean, it was Hitchens who introduced me to this concept of thought crime. You know, when he had when he did that speech where he said, like, I don't know, it's a very well known clip that's out there where, you know, it ends up where he says, and it convicts you of thought crime. and it stuck with me ever since I heard that the first time. You know, what a horrible wicked notion to imprint on people. You know,
yeah, and the idea when you finally kind of get exposed to the modern notion that the thoughts that you have are unbidden, you know, the doxastic involuntarism is accepted by neurologists.
Exactly.
Neurobiologists is like, you don't actually make your thoughts happen. Your thoughts kind of happen and you kind of react to them. There's an interplay. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And so, these ideas of, like, in a Catholic setting, it seemed like, oh, well, okay, you have those desires. That's fine. Don't act on them. But as a good Protestant coming up, you know, and it's all about sola scriptura and just reading your Bible and understanding. And it's like, well, Jesus said, I tell you, even for a person who is lusted in their heart is guilty of this. What do I deal with that?
Right.
That's red letter, New Testament stuff. That was spoken by Jesus. And that was an incredible hurdle for me. I could not, my brain couldn't get around it until the dogma kind of fell away.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. You know, they always say hindsight is 2020. If you could look back at your younger self now, knowing what you know today, you know, what kind of advice would you give to yourself, you know, to avoid stepping on some of these landmines in the road?
I would have encouraged, knowing my psychology now and then, I would have gone back if I was talking to myself and say, like, at the age of 20, or even 18, you know, I would have been like, hey, you know, you ran into good and bad stuff in the church. You're very outspoken about conservative politics. You're very outspoken when at least defending Christianity. I wasn't really big on defending a church. I'd had bad experiences with churches, but as far as, like, you know, defending my own faith, or, you know, if somebody said that Christianity wasn't real or anything, I would just blow that off. I would have encouraged myself, like, look, you know what would make you a much more convincing and powerful opponent? Read books and then provide the list. And then basically give, you know, like, here's the thing. You'll be a lot more, I would have appealed to that competitive nature in my younger self. That would have been like, okay, you want to win at discussions, whatever that means. You want to win at debate, you know. I wouldn't have been able to convince myself that there is no such thing as winning at a discussion, but I could have fed into that and been like, here's the ammo that you need for your brain. You know, your brain needs this to function, presented them with that. And then hopefully that younger self would have started working through those problems and processing that stuff before I hit, you know, 30. that would be, yeah. I just try to give myself a head start.
Yeah. And what was the fallout zone like for you when you announced to your immediate family and your family circles that you're not part of the cool kids club anymore? With some people have horrible stories about nuclear explosion level fallout zone, and especially when the environment becomes a bit more conservative, you'll also have a bit more of a pushback towards people who dissent from the norm. What was the reaction like in your circles?
My parents, I think, as far as I know, even now, they're still believers. But when that happened, I didn't go to them directly. They'd been like I was for a long time. I think they believe, but they don't attend church. And they've had issues with sort of they don't like strict dogma themselves. They kind of prefer their Christianity, I think, where it's murky, keep it murky. So in a way, that's kind of prevented them from really attending a church. I've actually tried to encourage them, like, there's an Episcopalian congregation you'd probably fit right in with. I mean, plenty of Anglicans don't believe in God at all. You'd be fine.
Yeah.
But I mean, you'll be the most devout ones walking through the door. It'll be perfect. They might even crown one of you a prophet. The issue for them, they didn't really even know about it. It wasn't even something we discussed anymore. They didn't regularly attend. They knew none of us did. I was living separate. I have got a lot of siblings, and they were all living separate at the time. My younger sister, I think, was the first one I told, and she was already leaning that way, and I didn't know it. And so we started talking with each other, and we were kind of on the same page. And then our conversations would kind of get leaked to my other brothers and sisters, and they started working with them too. I've got a twin brother, and he and I had lots of conversations on it. And he sort of kind of held on to sort of the Pascal's wager idea of it. He wasn't devout. He was willing to take any criticisms I offered, but he was just like, yeah, but he was still kind of convinced it's a possibility, that it's real. And I'm like, I mean, I'm sympathetic to somebody who thinks there's a possibility of some kind of greater power than what we can see or detect. I get critical when they say it's a guy and he doesn't want you to have sex before marriage. Like that's when I check out. Like, no, you can't possibly know that. So my brother had kind of gotten into that kind of deist kind of thing. And my older sister, she seemed to have a real problem with it initially because she was attending church at the time. I was kind of deconverting. And so we had conversations, and there were a couple times I got emotional for her. But other than that, that was it. I was pretty fortunate that most of my family was in a position where they were receptive to the change that I made, if they weren't already kind of going through it themselves. I didn't actually have a conversation with my father about it, who was the most devout out of any of the family, until a year or two ago. We just never discussed it. He discussed it with my twin brother. But and one day he kind of asked me about it, and he's like, well, you never brought it up, so I never brought it up with you. And I'm like, well, that was kind of my opinion. You never brought it up, so I never brought it. I didn't want to step on your toes. So yeah, it worked out okay. I think it's kind of an agree to disagree kind of thing. But I consider myself really lucky that it wasn't, a super dogmatic family that would remove me. Yeah.
And and there will be that one family member in everybody's life, where you just decide, look, the relationship with the family member is more important than dying on this particular hill.
Exactly.
And, it becomes like the brother in prison that everybody knows about, but nobody talks about. It's crazy how that works. Did you experience any significant shifts in your worldview? After deconverting, we've all heard stories of people becoming complete liberals in their outlook, and then other people going completely the opposite direction. And it's to be expected, when you have a radical shift in your world, in your belief system. Did any major shifts occur for you?
One, I remember there was an English class that I had one day, and the writer the instructor had prompted us with a question about something. and I can't remember what the thing was, but I gave an answer that to me now sounds like it came from a completely different person. And it was based, I believe people were born bad, and that was, I think, internalized by my religious background. And thinking back on that, like, I don't think in those terms at all anymore. I wouldn't even answer the question probably. It made me appreciate certain things that as a believer I probably took for granted. I wasn't like a young earth creationist per se. I was homeschooled. My parents were into that kind of thing. So we had all of the, with the fact that my mom was sympathetic to like ancient aliens ideas, and some very liberal ideas about the New Testament. We had the pedigree of becoming like perfect, like kind of MAGA Trumpy types, the onward Christian soldier, homeschooled, quiverful types, 12 kids. And yeah, but none of that stuff really, I always kind of looked, they would talk about things like evolution's not true. The Earth's only 6,000 years old, and syncopated beats lead to the devil. All that stuff, I was just like, huh? What? I don't know what this is. That's crazy. Sure, I love Jesus, but I don't love that. Yeah, all that stuff kind of got divorced from it. But I started appreciating arguments, the arguments from scientists about explanations for how we think the universe works, and things about cosmology and biology and that kind of stuff. I wasn't as quick to dismiss them as like, well, as a believer, I've got to put a pin in that because maybe we need to leave room for magic. That went away. I lost an enormous amount of anxiety. A lot of stuff just kind of fell off. My politics were changing, like I said before my religion kind of did. And as I was kind of deconverting from a sort of paleo conservative libertarian type, I think it was because I was more libertarian, whereas like anti-government kind of thing. I had a lot of liberal leanings anyway, legalize all drugs, legalize sex workers, all that kind of stuff. So that kind of put me at odds with certain conservatives. As I started shifting and kind of found that, probably if I was going to get labeled, I'm more of a socialist. I think that kind of helped, when I realized like, oh, I don't align with the thing that I aligned with here. Maybe I don't align with that thing over there. And both of them led to like I felt clear-headed. I felt a lot, less anxious, but in a way, I also kind of felt a little bit more isolated because obviously atheists it's not a big group. It's getting bigger, but it's not a huge group. And being a socialist, I think that's even smaller. So especially among my demographic, Gen X guys in the United States are not socialists, generally speaking. So
yeah, it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
And what about some of the we've touched a little bit on this, but what about some of the misconceptions that you encounter about atheism? We here in Africa especially, we are the worshippers of the devil. We're in cahoots with Satan, and I'm sure there's some misconceptions where you live as well.
The biggest one I get, mine is probably the one that's the biggest pet peeve of mine, is that atheists are always angry. All of them are. There are some. There are plenty that are. So that's actually kind of twofold. One, that we're all angry, as if that, and just as a general rule, and it's like, no, that's not true. And then the other one, that none of those atheists have a right to be angry, which bothers me too, because some of those, depending on what kind of, depending on how they grew up and and things that they had, experiences they had with church and with dogma and all this kind of stuff, they might have every right to be angry at religion, at least. I think people that are in that position emotionally have a lot more work to do in terms of separating their emotional reaction from like the critical thinking side of stuff. But that informs a rejection that is powerful, and they're the best people to speak to that. This is what, like, I know religion can have these kinds of detrimental effects because I felt them happen to me. I watched it happen to myself. So those are the two things that I think, like this idea that you can't have a discussion as soon as somebody has an emotional investment with it, one way or the other, they should be disqualified from the conversation. Just annoys the hell out of me. Like, facts don't care about your feelings. That's bullshit. You are a human being. Feelings are an engine for how we think. Like, you cannot, we're constantly processing feelings all the time. The other thing that bothers me is kind of like what you were saying earlier about the academic thing. You basically, you get exposed to something bad, you turn into a pointy-headed academic, and then we all go out proselytizing to basically spoil every religious person's fun. And it's like, I'm not interested in deconverting a Buddhist, mostly because you can't. I am very interested in pointing out the bullshit in Christian apologetics specifically. So don't tell me that I'm here, that I'm anti-Islam. I really don't know enough about Islam to be an anti-Islam, counter apologist. I would never do that. I can speak to issues that I've studied about the Bible. And so the idea that we're, or even in some cases that the atheist is anti-God. There are lots of atheists that are like, look, maybe I can kind of suspend disbelief in the notion that maybe there is some higher force or higher power, so panentheistic kind of thing. But what I'm really rejecting to here in this conversation is you want me to tithe. Like you have to, they're like, well, I don't want to talk about the Bible. I don't want to talk about scripture. Well, we have to, because that's ultimately where this is going. You don't just want me to believe in a force. You want me to believe in Yahweh and Jesus and the package
and
deal.
an organization behind, a planning organization behind this idea as well.
Yeah, and
it's
so
like when you mentioned the tithing, it just popped up in my mind how it's so insane. When you actually take a step back, when you step out of the chaos of the thought, the thought patterns and the ideas around religion, when you step out and you look out of it from the outside, it's so obvious that there's definitely an element of a scam involved in this. And here in Africa especially, they have got no shame, absolutely no shame. These pulpit, we call them the pulpit bandits. The pulpit bandits will go and they will extort the last cent from a starving old grandmother, simply to fund their lifestyles. It's without shame, and it is ghastly. It's a ghastly thing to see.
I think you probably know we've got like the super ministries like the Joel Osteen and stuff like that are able to build these huge fortunes and these mega churches, all tax exempt, and the idea here is that they're tax exempt as long as they're not fiddling with politics, and of course they are. It's kind of the same thing. It sounds like maybe it's a little bit more ramped up in your corner of the world, but. Yeah, it's got a lot of them like Joel Osteen and stuff. They're just so, it's a very weak kind of flabby message, but it's built on, I think, what we were talking about before, that kind of internalized fear of hell, maybe the possibility of a super paradise after you die. So it's getting you coming and going, and then I think the Catholic Church had the corner on this. As long as you showed up and you were baptized and you occasionally took communion, I think you were good to go. You could have all the doubts you wanted, But with Protestants in America, it seems like it's very important to them that you genuinely believe it, and I think that leads to an enormous amount of anxiety. And so,
what's up with that? What's up with that, Jefferson? Why will Christians never be satisfied until somebody else believes like they do? To me, that only shines a spotlight on the insecurity with which they hold this belief. I mean, if I am assured and confident in a belief that I have, it wouldn't faze me one bit if you didn't believe it too.
Yeah. I think part of it, I think, is that in I think it depends a little bit on the group. I've noticed in discussions that I've had online with Catholics, they don't seem to be that eager about it, and I was actually curious about attending a Catholic church near me to go into the classes because I wanted to see what they do. And because growing up as
the Jews as well. You know, the Jews as well. They also don't care if you
Right.
believe it or not.
Yeah.
You know,
And I was kind of curious, and also in a lot of cases, you know, in Judaism, a lot of it is about adherence to tradition and ritual. That's part of it. For Catholicism too, it's there's the Bible, but there's also the sanctity of the church, the tradition of the church. So you have these kind of experts. You can go to your priest, like, you know, with religious issues, like you can go to your accountant with tax issues. But with the Protestants, you know, a lot of that background is based on the idea that you have to know your Bible. It's a personal relationship you have with God, and your understanding of what you need to do is based on your own individual understanding of how this book works. It's a manual for life if only you can figure out exactly what its intentions are. And it's like, okay, that I think is what drives it, because if you start internalizing these ideas you get from the pulpit about the power of this message, and then you don't see it, you say it, and you don't see it affecting people and coming back, except maybe in ridicule or scorn. And it doesn't matter that there's Bible passages saying expect to be persecuted, expect to be ridiculed, expect scorn. Things go out there and you're like, well, I really need to see a lot more converts. I don't know. I'm starting to get a little insecure. Yeah, I think it's a general human thing. Like if you're in this group and you're excited about it, you want to see it reflected back, at least initially, to get that psychological boost. And but yeah, I think some of it is an insecurity, because if you don't have the community kind of backing you up, especially early on, I think they fear the effect of atheism because it reflects a feeling that they already have, that this promise of paradise just fall away that quickly just by being convinced it's fake.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. So let me just see here. Let's talk a little bit about positive aspects. You know, like what kind of, you know, a lot of people report, besides this general, you know, the benefits of not carrying around this big bag of guilt that's placed on your shoulders, people, you know, report a lot of freedom and, you know, feeling more free to express themselves openly and honestly. Any aspects of personal growth or you know, just positive spin-offs of letting go of your religion from your perspective?
Yeah, the first one was the freedom to feel angry, the freedom to be angry about things that I had disagreed with in religion, and because of my religious commitment, was afraid or felt constrained to even speak up about. And as soon as that was lifted, it was like, oh, well, now I can call this, you know, BS now. And I felt that was really liberating. And that did lead to a time of me being the angry atheist. You know, it's a scam. They're all out to get you. This is corrosive. Now, as I've been in this a little bit longer, I see it more as like, you know, I do think a lot of religious dogma, especially, is scammy. And most of it is built upon just supporting itself, not really supporting the people that are into it. But I have more. I hope that I have more compassion for people that are still believers, and a little bit more discernment between the people who they might still engage in a religion for whatever reason. They might be a little bit dogmatic emotionally or psychologically about some of these things, but I try to find the part of them that is thinking critically, you know. So yeah, I experienced a lot of relief psychologically when it left. It felt like all the guilt went away. But yeah, that my own growth in it went from being like kind of a desire to be the Peter Boghossian street epistemologist kind of thing, checking, you know, going out there and trying to convince them that they're wrong, to basically now being like, look, I don't need to engage them. I don't need to convince them to be an atheist. But what I hope I can be is a relatively sympathetic ear when they're trying to tell me about their religion, and I can respond with doubt and sometimes even with a little snark, in a way that maybe inspires them to apply that to their own stuff. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I think I've gotten a little bit better at that. Darth Dawkins and people like that make it hard because you just want to, you know, I mean, that guy's just a jerk. You just want to insult the hell out of him. It's fun. It's cathartic.
It's cathartic. Yeah, yeah. But you know, the funny thing is, Jefferson, is that anger is a natural response when you realize that you've been fooled and you've been duped. It's natural to feel angry.
Exactly.
You know, and then people people make this natural response out to be that there's something wrong with it. You know, if you weren't angry, there would be something wrong with it.
Right.
Because you essentially realizing, look, I've besides the people who have done this to me, the best intentions that they have, I've been duped and I've been fooled, and so have they. And it's okay. It's okay. We can move through it. But this is a natural response, and whenever people use that term, oh, look at that angry, why the atheist so angry? Like, have you paused and reflected on it for a second? Do people actually is that anger a justified response? Look, if you go through your life 10 years later and you're still angry, then there's probably something wrong, but
exactly, and I'm glad I'm there. Yeah, that's exhausting. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the anger can be really healthy, because you finally have the ability to vent that. But yeah,
and you don't internalize.
Yeah, you can kind of point to, like, the biggest thing for me, and it took me a while to do that, was I realized I was angry at myself for not thinking through things a little bit more critically and allowing those ideas to waste my time. I wasted a lot of concern. Yeah, that bugged me.
Yeah. Well, Jefferson, let's wrap it up there. I want to thank you for being so incredibly gracious with your time and for meeting with us and telling us about yourself. Where can people find you online if anybody wants to follow what you do?
You can find me at my YouTube channel is Jefferson Spatchcock. So you can find it there. That's where I do most of I haven't done a lot of posting since the holidays, and I've been recovering from an injury, so I haven't been active, but I'm planning on getting back into it, and with some new Darth content as well. So that's my primary one. I was on TikTok, but TikTok has now gone dark here in the US. So who knows what's going to happen with that. I used to be on like almost everything, but I'm moving away. Given Zuckerberg's latest personality crisis, I have divorced myself from any of the Meta apps. So if I've got one on my description, ignore that. I've got to pull that off there. But I'm also on Bluesky, which is a new app. So I don't use Twitter anymore. I don't use the Meta apps, but I am on YouTube.
Do me a favor and compile a list of your socials and just drop it to me in email, and I'll post it in the description if anybody wants to connect with you or follow you at some stage. Then they can just look at the description of the YouTube stream.
And I have
amazing.
I have an email as well. I'll include that as well. Fine.
I don't think it's a good idea to put your email in the description, because you're going to get like hundreds and hundreds of spam emails and things like that.
Oh, it might. Well, yeah, it's up to you. I usually give it out. I don't think I have it on my descriptions, but it's just my channel's email, so I take suggestions.
Okay. Amazing. Okay, well, like I said again, thank you so much for joining us, and take care, stay safe, keep thinking critically, and all of that good stuff. We'll catch you around.
Thanks again for the invite. You have a great rest of your day, and thanks to your audience. This was fun.
Amazing.